This edition of the Grenada Food and Nutrition Council's quarterly podcast has been graciously supported by St. Augustine Medical Services. St. Augustine Medical Services is committed to providing exceptional health care with state of the art facilities and a dedicated team of medical professionals. Whether you need routine checkups or urgent medical care, they have you covered. Their comprehensive services include outpatient services, full service laboratory, pharmacy and radiology, x rays, ultrasound, CT, and MRI, emergency room, 24/7 urgent care when you need it most, inpatient services, medical, surgical, and maternity care for all patients, ambulance services, rapid response for emergencies. Your health matters. Visit St. Augustine Medical Services today for trusted, compassionate, and quality care. Located at Library Junction, St. Paul's, Eastern Main Road. Contact St. Augustine Medical Services at 440-6173 or 6174 or 6175. Visit their website at samsgrenada.com. Welcome to the Grenada Food and Nutrition Council's quarterly podcast, your go-to source for expert insights on health and nutrition. The mission of the Grenada Food and Nutrition Council is to promote the health and well-being of the Grenadian population, encouraging them to make informed food choices and practice healthy lifestyles. In this episode, we tackle a growing concern, childhood obesity. Joining us are two esteemed guests, Dr. Rasheedah Andrews, Pediatric Attending and Diplomate of the American Board of Obesity Medicine, and Mrs. Lydia Browne, Registered Dietitian and Chief Executive Officer of the Grenada Food and Nutrition Council. Together, they'll explore the causes, impact, and solutions to help our children lead healthier lives. Let's dive in.
This is of a major importance for the council, and not just for the council, I think, but for every Grenadian, because the Grenada Food and Nutrition Council conducts surveys among children under the age of 5. We do children from 3 months to 3 years in the daycare centers, and then we look at 3 years to 5 at the preschools. And years ago, what was the problem was undernutrition or underweight. And we still have a little bit of that, but what we're seeing is that from year to year, we're seeing an elevation in the number of children screening as overweight, obese. And then there's a category of children we consider who are at risk. So they're not yet overweight, but they're bordering being considered overweight. And so that is of concern for us. Additionally, what we're seeing is that in the last couple of years, what we're seeing is that we have an increase in the number of children who are stunted. And then we're seeing children who are both stunted and overweight, which means when we say stunted, we mean the children aren't in line in terms of their growth. They're not as tall as other children in their age group. So we're seeing that nutrition is of the utmost importance. We're seeing that nutrition is, we might be getting food, but we may not necessarily be getting nutrition.
Well, the first thing that I tell parents before I even get into the room with them and their child, I speak to them separately. And I tell them that the F word is off the table. So we do not say fat in my office at all. And we also use people-centered language. So it's not an obese child. It is a child with obesity. It is a disease. It is not their fault that they have this. We have to help them solve the problem. So doing that, and then also telling parents, a lot of times parents will be like, see, I told you, you don't pick on your kid, especially in the doctor's office when we're talking about something that's, because really uncomfortable. So a lot of the times we start off the conversation by saying, is it okay if we talk about your weight today? Is that something that you're comfortable discussing with me? Is it something that bothers you? Like, how does it make you feel? You want them to make sure that they feel like they're in a safe space to discuss their weight. And then I always reinforce with the parents, don't talk about your kid's weight to them in a negative light. I know in the Caribbean, and I've experienced this growing up, because even as a child, I struggled with my weight. You come home from a vacation, or you come home from somewhere, or somebody hasn't seen you in a long time, and they don't say good morning or good afternoon. Their first comment is, "Girl, you put on weight, you lose weight, you have stress." And this is not the way that you greet people. And that it bothers people. And it used to bother me. And as I became an adult and people would say these things to me, I'd be like, this is not a greeting. I would prefer for you to greet me appropriately. But children don't have, you know, that thought process just yet. I'll say some children, because some of them are very outspoken, which I do love. But you know, reminding yourself that this is a sensitive thing. Don't greet people in that way. Don't comment on people's way. You don't know what they're going through. They can have a medical issue. Even for our adult patients, they can have things like hypothyroidism. We have a lot of people in Grenada here with PCOS. You do not know their struggles. So commenting on someone's weight is never the right way to greet them or to say anything, because you really don't know what struggles they're going through. And then just also making sure that the child is included, or the whole family is included, and the child is not excluded in the weight loss journey or the journey to healthier weight. So parents may want to cook separate meals for that child as opposed to other children in the home that may be a little bit more on the leaner side. And I tell them, do not do that. It is across the board for everybody. We are all going healthy. So you're getting rid of the snacks, getting rid of the sodas, getting rid of the juices. You're going to cook healthy meals that your whole family is going to enjoy. You're all going to go on a family walk. You're all going to go biking. Everybody is getting involved. We do not want this child to be excluded, because it has been shown that when children have these mental health repercussions from being overweight or even just being stigmatized in the community, it leads to them gaining more weight. Shaming someone about their weight does not lead them to lose weight. It makes them spiral into gaining more weight. So reinforcing that in the office is a really important thing for me.
One of the things that I tend to do with parents is to first get an idea as to how the child is eating. When I say how the child is eating, or maybe I should say what the child is eating throughout a particular, a typical day in that child's life. And then I'm able to take it from there to kind of give the parent, especially if it's a very young child, that where I have to be speaking more to the parent than to the child, to give them some guidance based on the information that they gave me on small things that they may be able, that they, you know, explore with them whether they would be willing to consider certain things. Now, sometimes you may have a parent being referred to a dietitian or nutritionist for their child being overweight or even in an obese category. But the parent, you can tell from the demeanor, from their responses to you, that they really don't want to be here. They really just don't want to be here. So it's important for me as a professional not to belabor the fact that this child is overweight or obese, because the parent really already knows that. They really already knows that. So I think it's a matter of just looking at what you're doing now. What can, you know, how can we improve you? For certain ages of the children, you're really not talking about the child losing weight, right? You're really not looking at losing weight. What you're looking at is to kind of stabilize the weight, but that allow the child to grow. So as the child grow, then they would kind of, you know, thin out into the weight, right? So you're not looking to gain pounds, but you know, you're allowing that child to grow. So I kind of try to talk about it in that way. It's not that we're looking for your child to come back and they're 5 pounds down. Not that, because we're going to look at the growth as well, because you want to see that the child is growing linearly and not just, you know, putting on weight. So I think it's actually feeling out the parent or even feeling out the child, because if it's like a teenager, sometimes the parent may bring them in, but they're not really interested. And you really just have to walk around it and, you know, like Dr. Andrew was saying, find out how does it make you feel? You know, does your current weight even bother you at all? Is there anything that, you know, do you think you need to be here? Sometimes when you get into conversation with the child, then at some point they will the ice is broken and they feel comfortable. And sometimes speaking to them without the parent based on the child's age makes it a little easier for them to discuss things that may be happening that the parent may or may not be aware of. And sometimes it could be something that's happening in the home that is causing them to, eat a little more. Sometimes in my position, I say, maybe I should have been a psychologist because sometimes some of the things that you hear, you're not really prepared to handle it, but to know how you can make a referral if you think that is necessary, and not try to handle everything for yourself that you're not prepared to handle in your discipline.
It is a battle. So we really have to start, one, educating our parents from the get-go, even from preconception through the pregnancy, because a lot of the things that have to do with obesity can actually be prevented. So as an example, and I'm just going to start from the beginning, if moms are counseled prior to conceiving about making sure that my weight is within range, because mothers that tend to be obese will also produce children that will have obesity later on in life. And that's just part of epigenetics. We don't have to get into that. It's a very large conversation, but those are things that we can do. So talking about breastfeeding, children that are breastfed, for every single month they're breastfed for, there's a 4% reduction in the risk of obesity. So, really reinforcing to our moms, breastfeeding is the best, breast is best. And of course, to our moms out there that are having difficulty, feeding your baby is obviously the ultimate goal, but if you are able to breastfeed, please do. We definitely look at things like weight for length, as well as BMI. So weight for length, we typically do use in children less than 2. BMI, we use over the age of 2. We're looking a lot in children at percentiles. So if we're talking about BMI, it is simply just a ratio of the child's weight in kilograms to height in meters squared. And then we go by percentiles. So any child that is over the 95th percentile would be considered as obese. Between the 84.9 to 94.9 is considered as overweight. But that's how we would define it typically. Things like type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure. And a lot of parents are like, what do you mean my kid has high blood pressure? Yes, your child can have hypertension. There is pediatric hypertension. High cholesterol, it can lead to things like sleep apnea, even joint problems. There's a particular disease called SCFE. We see that more so in children that are obese. So basically, think about your femur, which is your long bone in your thigh. It goes into your hip joint at the top. And what we look for on the x-ray is basically that it looks like an ice cream cone, and the ice cream has fallen off of the cone. And we do typically see that in children who are obese. So they'll come in either complaining of hip pain or knee pain, sudden inability not to bear weight on that leg. But that is the typical presentation of that. With regards to sleep apnea, it's basically a type of sleep disordered breathing. It can either be central or peripheral, meaning just from compression of tissue. So a lot of the times we have like older folks in our families, you'll be like using the CPAP machine at night. Children can also get that, which parents are always like, oh, that's that. I didn't know that. We have a lot of children that snore. Snoring is not normal. It is never normal for your child to snore. It's one of the things that we do screen for, because it's actually a cycle in terms of obesity. So if your child is snoring at night, they're getting poor sleep. If you're getting poor sleep, that can lead to weight gain. And then on top of that, that leads to behavior problems as well. So it's part of the questionnaire that we do ask when we have a child coming in to be evaluated for obesity. Because like I said, it is a cycle. And we can't also forget things like the mental health issues that come with weight, just from also stigma, or just even isolation in society, leading to things like depression and anxiety. But those are a few of the health risks that our children face.
We as adults, we have lived for quite many years. And when we start having children, we have the affinity to want to gravitate towards sweets because we've been exposed to sweets. And so we assume that if we don't like whatever it is we feed in this child because it's not sweet, we should make it sweet for the child. And the child don't know sweet. We are the ones introducing that sweet. So we do have some milks, powdered milks on the market that is targeted for children, that when you look on the label on the ingredient list, there's sugar added to it. We do have cereal, certain types of cereal that is even geared for children at 6 months. This is when you're introducing the complementary feed that also has some type of sweetener in it. One of them in particular has honey added to it. And so we're actually introducing, if baby's first food you're introducing is a cereal, and you're introducing a sweet cereal, then the chances of that child not wanting to eat vegetables when you give that child some pureed vegetables, it's increased, that they would probably not want it because it doesn't taste the way that first food that you introduced tastes. So I think it's important, and also the order in which you introduce the food. So maybe not starting with the pureed fruit, but starting with the pureed vegetables so that the child get that likeness for the vegetable foods. And sometimes we choose foods that are sweeter, like pumpkin, the vegetables that are sweeter, pumpkin and carrots. And we will give the child that type of thing because we feel that that is what the child would like. But parents have to recognize, particularly people, and I wouldn't even say for first-time parents, because if you did it for your first child, you're probably doing it for your sixth child, right? So I think introducing things like the callaloo, which we know is rich, has iron in it, that the child can get the taste for more of those savory type things, and not adding a lot of the seasonings and things, because baby stomach is very tender and they're not ready to handle the seasonings and so that we put into our food. Later on in life, the child can get that, but in the initial stages, you really don't need to be adding anything to the child food. I think if we think natural and feeding our children naturally, that is what they will grow up liking.
It is important for us to also realize that there are actually genetic diseases that are associated with obesity. So things like there's a mutation called MC4R, POMC deficiency, leptin deficiency. These are all hormones and receptors that play a part in weight regulation. There are also genetic syndromes that are associated with obesity. So things like Down syndrome, Bardet-Biedl, all of those things, Fragile X. I'm not sure if we have any of those. I mean, we know we have Down syndrome in Grenada, but the other ones, I'm not sure if we have documented cases of those here, but those are also genetic things that are implicated in having obesity. But it is a multifactorial disease. So it's really important for us to focus on healthy habits that can be adopted regardless of family history to make sure our children maintain a healthy weight. And we do recommend breastfeeding for 6 months exclusively. We prefer if you go all the way up to a year. At 6 months, we tend to introduce complementary foods. When we are introducing complementary foods, we want to make sure we're doing a lot of whole grains. So like I usually start doing like the veggies and the fruit purees, and like making sure that my parents are not adding things like the baby formula into it. You can add a little breast milk if you like, if you want to thin it out, a little bit of water. I definitely encourage them not to start introducing snacks and chips, because if you give a child an apple or a cookie, they will always choose the cookie. It comes also back to just education, like teaching our parents how to read labels. I cannot tell you the number of times parents are like, oh, I didn't know this was bad. And like, we actually go through, how do I read a label, so that they understand how to make healthier choices for themselves and their families. Another thing that we do as well, especially if a child is already on these high sugary foods, is start weaning. It's very difficult for anybody to go to cold turkey on anything. So if you have a child that's on a lot of juice, we shouldn't be drinking juice, honestly, or soda or anything like that. But it is difficult to tell a child, yesterday you had juice, today you're not having any more juice for the rest of your life. So what we do typically recommend is mixing the juice by watering it down. So even when we are doing a little bit of juice, even when we have children that are constipated, we will take 1 ounce of water to 1 ounce of juice, mix that together, and then give your child a small amount of that mixture. As time progresses, please water it down. And eventually they'll get to the place where they no longer may want these things. Even doing flavored water is another way to get water into your kid's diet while still making it a tiny bit sweet, but at least we're using natural sugars. Opting for fruits instead of like our high fructose corn syrup snacks. That's another way to just avoid sugary foods. It really comes down to education, because a lot of times too, in the office, parents will say, I don't know why he or she is eating this. I'm like, he or she has no money. You are providing these things. You have to stop buying them. So I think it's a combination of a lot of things, but they're all very easy to implement, and you just have to be consistent over time.
This edition of the Grenada Food and Nutrition Council's quarterly podcast has been graciously supported by St. Augustine Medical Services. St. Augustine Medical Services is committed to providing exceptional health care with state-of-the-art facilities and a dedicated team of medical professionals. Whether you need routine checkups or urgent medical care, they have you covered. Their comprehensive services include outpatient services, full service laboratory, pharmacy and radiology, x rays, ultrasound, CT, and MRI, emergency room, 24/7 urgent care when you need it most, inpatient services, medical, surgical, and maternity care for all patients, ambulance services, rapid response for emergencies. Your health matters. Visit St. Augustine Medical Services today for trusted, compassionate, and quality care. Located at Library Junction, St. Paul's, Eastern Main Road. Contact St. Augustine Medical Services at 440-6173 or 6174 or 6175. Visit their website at samsgrenada.com. Welcome back to the second half of the Grenada Food and Nutrition Council's quarterly podcast. Today we are discussing childhood obesity. Joining us are two esteemed guests, Dr. Rasheedah Andrews, Pediatric Attending and Diplomate of the American Board of Obesity Medicine, and Mrs. Lydia Browne, Registered Dietitian and Chief Executive Officer of the Grenada Food and Nutrition Council.
Now, when a family is the initial environment that child will be nurtured in. How a family eat, the type of foods a family make a decision to bring into the house. When children are very young, they're from infancy, 1, 2 years old, 3 as toddlers, this is their real formative years. And if they are introduced to certain foods at that age, then that's the foods they're likely going to go forward in life wanting. Not only that, but the quantity of food that is served to a child is also of importance. If everyone in the family, and I always use this, if you have a 9-inch plate and the plate has a pretty something on the rim, when you're eating, you're supposed to see that pretty something. Is the reason why it's there. It's not supposed to be covered with food. But if that child grows up and is seeing everyone in the family eating where their food is not only covering that beautiful part of the plate, but also high on the plate, when that child, as a child grows up, that's how they think that it's normal to eat. That becomes normal. And so I think it's important that we pay attention to child size portions for children. Another thing that I know growing up, I would hear young mothers in my neighborhood would say that you have finished the plate. You're not wasting my food. You're going to clean everything off of this plate. And children have that natural instinct, that cue of knowing I've had enough.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that you can't give the child something later on, particularly if you see the child is struggling to gain some weight. And so it's okay, but the child may not be able to eat as much as you're giving them in one sitting. So it's important that we allow the child to use the inbuilt cues to determine whether they've had enough or not, and not us imposing on them what we think is enough. What we put on your plate, you have to finish it. And I think by doing that, children may grow up feeling, oh, well, whatever is on my plate, I have to finish it. And then if they see large portions on the adults in their house plate, then when they're putting food on their plate, they're going to put a lot and feel, I have to finish it as well. So I think in looking at environment, it's not just the environment, looking at the environment, but also cues that are being given to the child that you have to finish. So I think we just have to be careful with our choice in words that we say to the child, the things that we encourage and the things that we discourage.
So we do something called the 5-2-1-0. So ensuring that per day, our children are having 5 servings of fruit and vegetable per day, less than 2 hours of screen time, because when our kids are watching TV, they are snacking and they're not doing mindful eating. So I wanted to just kind of circle back to that a little bit as well, because mindful eating is so important. Because when you are, just as an example, at the movie theater, sitting with a bag of popcorn, looking at your credits, really, the movie has not yet started, but you're looking at the credits, you're just mindlessly eating. And that is what happens a lot of the time. Like I've seen parents give the kid a tablet and the kid is just, they're eating. They're not going to recognize when they're full. So we really have to focus in and hone in on mindful eating. So one of the things that we do encourage is doing family meals. Everyone puts away their phones, puts away the screens. We can have nice conversation and you can have a little ambient music in the back. That's totally fine. But when you do that, you eat less. In addition to that, I ask parents usually to start with the veggies and the protein. So that way you're eating less of the starch. Because we talk also a lot about the My Plate Planner, which is half a plate of veggies or fruit, depending on what meal you're having, a quarter of protein, and a quarter of starch. And if you are doing a starch, it should be a complex starch. So that could be your sweet potato, that could be your breadfruit, it could be your fig, your brown rice instead of white rice. But you want to really focus in on those. You want to make sure your children are at least having 1 hour of aerobic activity, meaning that your child is sweating, their heart is racing. It doesn't necessarily have to be a gym program, because like when you start getting into children weightlifting, that's a whole different conversation, but it's something that we could talk about. Your children can weightlift safely, as long as they're being supervised, but 1 hour of aerobic activity, and it should be happening every day. We want our kids to be outside, and that's a trend that we've seen decline over the years. Our children are more and more and more inside. They're always on a device. They're always in front of the TV or in front of a video game. And our children are becoming very sedentary. Another thing that we talk about is the 0 in the 5-2-1-0, which is no juices and no sodas. And we talked a little bit earlier how to wean those and get them out of our kids' diets. We don't need these things. They're extra sugars that we do not need. We need nutrient-dense foods in our diets, and those are not that. So we've talked about My Plate, we talked about 5-2-1-0. Those are the little things that we can do just to kind of help our parents out a little bit, as well as teaching them how to read labels. I think that's really important. I think education about health, about nutrition, about how can I be healthier, that is where we have not been doing enough. And I think that's what would make a huge difference going forward.
One thing I would like to advocate for, I think Dr. Andrews has covered it pretty much, but is parents getting involved with their children with physical activity. I think because children have gotten so used to screen, and I'm not just talking, I said children, but even infants, babies, you're seeing parents handing them the phone or a tablet in order to keep them quiet. And so these children, before they're 2 years old, they can do things on the phone or on a tablet that I, myself as an adult, probably still trying to figure out, right? So there is almost like they're born with a gadget in their brain somehow. But if we are able to get out there with the children sometime, and they love that. Children love when mommy and daddy could come outside and throw a ball or bat a ball or jump a rope, even if it's just to turn the rope for them, because us as adults, we are also seeing that we're getting heavier. So if we actually from young get out there with the children and be a part of whatever they're doing, so that you're leading by example. You're not just telling them go out or go play or something, because I remember having kids myself, when I would tell them go out and play initially, they would say, well, what are we going to do when we go out? And that prompted me to say, what do you do? But I know I grew up outdoors. So I had to go out and actually be with them and to show them, yeah, this is what you can do when you go outdoors, right? So children have to learn to appreciate, and it's not just a matter of going out and jumping rope or throwing a ball, just even taking a walk and enjoying the greenery. Grenada, we call ourselves greens. Grenada is green, right? Go out and just look at things, pick leaves, do something just to get them outside of the house and not sitting in front of these gadgets, because I know it's the devices have become babysitter number 2 for some parents, but we have to think about down the road, because it might be easier now because it's giving you a peace of mind. But later on, when the child gets overweight and obese and they're having health-related problems, it becomes even harder on you as a parent. So even if it's out of selfishness, looking out for yourself down the road, then get out there and be with your kids and teach them how to be active. Take them on the beach, throw a ball when you're on the beach, not just sit on the sand. You know, these type of things to just get that physical activity going. It doesn't have to be something daunting as putting on an exercise program or jumping a rope. I can't jump because my knees are already hurting me, so I can't jump with them. You just find things and change it up a little bit so that it doesn't become monotonous and the children get bored with it.
Those particularly in babies, we don't want them to lose weight. We're just monitoring at that point. So I would say for younger children, like even under the age of 5, the focus is on more stabilizing the weight, making sure that the parents are feeding appropriately, making sure they're not overfeeding the baby. How are they mixing the formula? That's one of the biggest issues that we do see. A lot of parents are mixing formula improperly, either watering it down or they're adding too much because they feel like it doesn't look creamy enough. So those are the questions that we definitely do look at, but we just continue to monitor. We're not so much concerned about weight loss at that point. Even for my older patients, I tell them during the visits, even if you came back next month and you saw me and you gained 5 pounds, as long as you made one positive change from what we've discussed today, that is a win. The weight loss is not the goal, it's the journey. We're getting to where we need to go, but we're not so much concerned about the weight loss in the babies, particularly, like I said, children less than 5.
I think, like I mentioned earlier, the younger children, you really, because they're still growing.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you have an 18-year-old, the child is pretty much as grown as they would get. So it's a little bit different there. I think not so much, I really don't focus so much on someone losing weight in the younger years. For a baby, no, and particularly for children who are breastfed tend to be, as you say, very fluffy. That's the word you use, very fluffy. They tend to have more weight on them because breast milk is actually pretty high in fat, right? And the children tend to be heavier. They tend to be heavier in their younger years, in the infant years, but as they grow up and get into adulthood, they tend to be the children that are less likely to get overweight or obese, right? So it's the breastfeeding that was mentioned earlier by Dr. Andrew is not just helping you as an infant, but it also may be carrying you throughout the rest of your life. So sometimes you see children that are very heavy, and because they're breastfed, you know, but sometimes you really have to explore, because mommy may be saying she's exclusively breastfeeding, because sometimes parents, when they come to a physician or they come to any type of medical practitioner, anybody in the medical field, they may feel they have to say certain things because that's what you want to hear. But it's very important that we be as truthful as possible. So we have to just be mindful what we say to the practitioner is how they can help. Now, in terms of the formula and milk, I can attest to that sometimes it goes both ways. You have children who are, we're speaking of obesity, but we have children who are struggling with weight gain. And because of the cost of formula, and this is why it's so important that if you can breastfeed, because it's a cost. There's a cost saving effect in breastfeeding. You feed yourself, you feed your child. Because if you're going to buy a can of formula, one can of formula, and expect for that one can of formula to last the month, then it means baby is pretty much drinking colored water. And then you go to the doctor and the doctor say, well, this child is so much old and they only gained 2 pounds since, you know, this length of time. The child is not gaining sufficiently. We have to be mindful that children being well fed in the younger years is what would allow them to be good, productive citizens later on. Is going to allow them to be able to function cognitively at the maximum, right? So we have to make sure that children are well fed, but we don't want to also make sure that they're not overfed. So thickening the formula, or sometimes even when cereals get introduced to the child, some mummies will tend to put it in the bottle.
Yeah.
Put it in the bottle, and then they would make a bigger hole in the nipple, because now the cereal is thick in the bottle, so it can't come through the same hole that just the formula or the breast milk, because breast milk can be pumped, can come through the nipple. So when that child pull, they're getting a good bit of that formula or breast milk with the cereal, and may very well take in more than they should take in. So when cereals are introduced, they should be fed. They should be fed in a bowl or a cup or whatever, but with a spoon, and you feed it to the child. And then the child can have their drink of whatever, the breast milk or the formula or whatever you're giving after. So you make sure that the child is, you know, takes in sufficient, right? But we have to be mindful of that. Another thing is that sometimes during the course of the day, the child is being given so much drink, so much to drink, be it juice, be it milk, formula, whatever it is, that the child is really not getting all the nourishment that they need, because they're not able to eat the food that they should be eating, because their stomachs are small and it can only hold so much. And if we fill it up with a lot of milk and so, then there's no room. There's no room for the food, right? So the child may very well drink a lot, and this child is drinking so much milk that you can't afford to keep up with it, because the child is really getting too much within the course of the day.
And that comes back to policy. So also getting other stakeholders involved, whether it be the government, private institutions like the private schools, to ensure that we're not stocking our tuck shops with things like the juices, the sodas, that we're stocking it with things that are healthy. One of the things that I would always advocate for would be having school gardens. So our kids, they do agriculture science in school as a subject. They should be growing their own food as well. So that way we have a fresh supply of fruits and veggies in the school. And also comes back to the education like we were talking about before. So what they do at home with their families is they're eating healthy at home. They will continue to model that behavior at school. And at school, obviously, physical activity would be really important. So having safe space for our children to play and exercise. Like I mentioned earlier, 1 hour of aerobic activity per day. So that should be happening from toddlerhood to the point where they're done with high school, even in TAM-CC, I guess, as much. But it really just a combination of factors, but particularly in the schools, I think those are the ones that are going to be really important, or even just making sure that we are packing healthy lunches for our children to go to school with, I think is a big thing. We have so many beautiful natural ingredients here in Grenada that I think are so underutilized that we really can tap into to send our kids to school with something that's really nutritious, but also delicious as well.
Cleaning up our school environment is important. And when I say cleaning up our school's environment, I don't mean sweeping the grounds. I mean cleaning it up in terms of the nutritional, the foods, let me not say the nutrition, the foods that are that is available to children during the school year. Now we have to understand that there are some foods that are going to be beneficial to a child or to any of us, and there are other foods that are just not going to be helpful. So when in the morning, the children eat, they don't eat breakfast at home. And we don't have a school breakfast program. There are some schools where, I mean, some of the teachers also may get together and they may have breakfast for some children, but it's not like the school lunch program. Children drink some Kool-Aid laden with sugar, a fry bake, a fried chicken wing, and that's breakfast. They have in the primary school, they have a break time and then they have a lunch time. In the secondary school, I think they have just one break time that they would have their lunch and so. When we have a lot of sugary things and things that are low in nutrition value, we say a lot of empty calories, foods available on the compound. When these children eat these things, now when you get a lot of sugar into your body is going to respond to break down that sugar. And when that sugar drops after your body has responded, it's sleepy time. So when you're thinking that you give your child $20 a day to go to school and they're buying some of everything, maybe after they eat that, whatever it is they choose to eat that time and drink those big drinks, 20-ounce drinks for children who are 6 and 7 years old, laden with sugar, the afternoon classes, it would be good to do a study where you would actually see the children when they come in the morning, if we had a breakfast program, that they fed a healthy breakfast, and what their performance is on exams, the first part of the day to when they buy whatever they want to buy, and the second half of the day to see what their scores are in those classes. It would be very interesting to see what the results of those foods, the effect those foods are having on our children. I know people have to make an income and sometimes going and getting the snacks and the cookies and so on, bringing it to sell for the children. It's giving you a revenue flow. But we have to be mindful that when we have golden apples outside, why not peel the golden apples and put it in some little whatever receptacle and sell it to the children instead of going and getting spices, sugar, having to use fuel, whether it's coal, whether it's gas, whatever type of fuel you need in, and cooking this down into a stew and bringing it to sell to the children. I remember going to Bonnet Government School a couple years back. And when I walked onto the compound, there were no vendors there. But later on, the vendors came. But when the children came out, because I went to look at what the vendors were selling, when the children came out, oddly enough, I saw a lot of children with 2 golden apples in a plastic bag. But I didn't see any of the vendors selling that. So I stopped a little girl and I said, where did you all get this golden apple? She said a gentleman passed early in the morning. All he did was get the golden apples, peel it, package it, and so many of the children on the compound had this golden apple that I had to ask because it was obvious that they got this golden apple from somewhere. I mean, so many of them had it. I think children will purchase, if you're giving your children that spending power, they will purchase whatever is available. If it's not available, especially the younger children, they're not going to go looking for it. So I think it's important for us to not just clean up the school environment in terms of what is on the school compound in the tuck shops, but what actually is allowed onto the school compounds. So that during that 8 hours or whatever the children spend in school, they don't have it. Now, if you choose to load your children up with that in the afternoon because you feel your children have to have it, which they don't, but if you feel they have to have it, then you're entitled to your opinion. But at least during the school hours, they really don't need all of this stuff. I think it's just important. The school environment is important, but we need the support of the vendors. We need the support of the community. We need the support of the principals. We need the support of the teachers. We need the support of the cooks. We need the support of the gardeners, the caretakers. Everyone needs to be on board. And this is not for the Grenada Food and Nutrition Council. This is for the children of Grenada, Carriacou, and Petite Martinique.
This edition of the Grenada Food and Nutrition Council's quarterly podcast has been graciously supported by St. Augustine Medical Services. St. Augustine Medical Services is committed to providing exceptional health care with state-of-the-art facilities and a dedicated team of medical professionals. Whether you need routine checkups or urgent medical care, they have you covered. Their comprehensive services include outpatient services, full-service laboratory, pharmacy and radiology, X-rays, ultrasound, CT, and MRI, emergency room, 24/7 urgent care when you need it most, inpatient services, medical, surgical, and maternity care for all patients, ambulance services, rapid response for emergencies. Your health matters. Visit St. Augustine Medical Services today for trusted, compassionate, and quality care. Located at Library Junction, St. Paul's, Eastern Main Road, contact St. Augustine Medical Services at 440-6173 or 6174 or 6175. Visit their website at samsgrenada.com. Thank you for joining us for the Grenada Food and Nutrition Council's quarterly podcast, where we focused on childhood obesity. We'd like to thank Dr. Rasheedah Andrews and, of course, Mrs. Lydia Browne for an engaging discussion on the topic. Special thanks also to St. Augustine Medical Services for their in-kind support. Our next episode will air in June.